Welcome to Drinking on the Edge. I'm David Fuhrer, and joining me today at the Radio Free Rhinecliff studios, tucked away in the back of the Epicurean shop in Rhinecliff, New York, along the Hudson River, is Carlo DeVito. Welcome, Carlo.
Thank you for having me.
And joining us for this very unique and special episode of Drinking on the Edge, we have three of the executives who represent as directors of their state's agricultural departments. We have from California, Secretary of Agriculture Karen Ross.
Good morning.
We have from Maryland, Secretary of Agriculture Kevin Addix.
Hello.
And from our home state of New York, we have representing Agriculture Commissioner Richard Ball.
Great to be with you today. Drinking on the Edge. What a great line. Reminds me of high school.
The Small Winery Acts of Pennsylvania and New York and the Farm Winery Act, enacted in the mid-1970s, and subsequent similar laws had a profound effect on the wine landscape across the nation. How did these, that first started in Pennsylvania and New York, affect your state?
I'd be happy to jump into that. I'm the oldest one here. For a number of years after I first became president of the California Association of Wine Grape Growers, we were really working on the distribution bottleneck. And I started traveling across the country and speaking to burgeoning wine grape growers, including in my home state of Nebraska, which was a surreal activity. But I remember the first time I went to Washington State before I headed east and watching all of the growers in the audience who were still in wheat or asparagus or tree fruit and were just getting into wine grapes. And they're sitting looking at me like, what's the 800-pound gorilla from California going to say to us? And the first thing I said was, we need you a lot more than you need us, because we do want this to be embraced as a national sector for all the things that it does for rural and local communities. And we believe that wine can be a part of family gatherings around the food, and wine trails tend to bring food trails along with them. And it just seemed like a really wonderful way of bringing another part of agriculture and urban communities together. And to help us, every state has 2 United States senators. There's many issues, including going way back to Pierce's disease and other pest issues that we all worked on together. And I really commend the pioneers in New York and Maryland and Virginia and other states who were eager to join in and help us work together to make a lot of advances.
Secretary Ross, I'll say, coming from Maryland, by all accounts, a small state in this discussion, but having some unique attributes given our population and our proximity to D.C., I remember for 20 years hiking the hill with you, talking about Pierce's disease before there was any shot of Pierce's disease coming to Maryland. And in fact, last year it arrived. And so all of those years of asking for funding and research, but doing it in a united way, really made a difference. I did want to point to something. There's the agricultural side of watching our industries diversify over the years, from the wheat, the asparagus, et cetera. But there's most definitely, and you mentioned it as well, the cultural and political side of I'm sure we'll get into it, but the Farm Winery Act that many of our states adopted was the beginning of the counter argument to the 3-tier system. And in places like Maryland, where we still have blue laws, it was moving past these old ideas that you couldn't do certain things, or you certainly couldn't do certain things on Sundays. And it's been quite the evolution for us over the last 25 years.
Great comments, great thoughts. I think I look back to the 70s, and I think we had about 20 statewide wineries in our state. And I think that's when we began to grow up as an industry, frankly. There was just night and day differences between then and now. We took the leashes off. We began to recognize in New York State the resources we had with all the regions we have in the state, Long Island and the Finger Lakes, which is such a special area. Even the North Country is getting in the act now. And we started figuring out how to grow those sophisticated grapes that the restaurant world and the fine dining world wanted. We had been dominated by Concord grapes, largely by our acreage, because grape juice is a big deal in New York State. But I think that's when we started to realize and recognize our potential and the research that we put into it. Certainly think about 20 wineries statewide, and now I don't even know today where we are, but it's well over 400, closer to 500 wineries, and more coming on. And the varieties that we grow today, we discovered that we can grow those vinifera grapes and we can develop new varieties, and it's a big deal for us in our research stations. And so I think that's when we began to wake up and recognize the sleeping giant that we had.
You're now up to 528 wineries officially, according to the statistics that we were given. And it's just a remarkable thing to see what happened with those laws and how that wildfire spread right across the rest of the country as well. You had somebody like Leon Adams championing a lot of those laws, as you guys were talking about earlier. So it's really quite fascinating. Agricultural tourism has grown significantly in all three of your states over the years. And are you seeing year-on-year growth? And certainly with the addition of some of these other new businesses like breweries and spirits, how has that affected your agricultural tourism?
I'll jump in here. I think it's been dramatic. I think one of the first things we saw in that vein was wine trails, the opportunity for a wine trail. And that was pretty neat. And it was a little clunky because it was legislative and it was in statute and needed all kinds of approvals. But now we've got all kinds of craft beverage trails and cuisine trails on top of that. So that's not something that at the Department of Ag we quantify. We don't measure how much agritourism dollars there are. We do know that the number of farms involved in it is growing every year exponentially. Tourism economics just around distilleries or wineries is growing like a house of fire. It's like that initial thing we were just talking about. And it's brought people to the Finger Lakes, brought people to Western New York, brought people to Long Island. You can't drive down Sound Avenue in Long Island late fall because of everyone heading to a winery. We've just got 3,000 acres of cultivated grapes for wine on Long Island itself. So it's exponential. It's been awesome for our farmers and our growers.
Pumpkin season is an awful difficult thing. Long Island, everybody's either going for a pumpkin or a winery. Or both. How about you, Secretary Ross?
Tourism is a big industry for California. In particular, we welcome over 25 million visitors every year. And we haven't seen recent numbers on this, but we do know that many of those travelers, whether they're domestic or coming from every country in the world, many of them are coming here for the food and wine tourism aspects of it, that they really want to go out and have those kinds of culinary hands-on experiences. And we calculated that approximately $150 billion of economic activity that's generated by our visitors on an annual basis. Over $25 billion of that is really centered around wine and culinary tourism. Those are the dollars aspects of it. For me, one of the most significant differences I've seen in my history here is everybody thinks of wine country as Napa, and maybe they'll put Sonoma in it. Even now, I still find people that do that. And I used to welcome audiences by saying, welcome to the land of wine countries, because now we have Paso Robles and Santa Barbara and all the different appellations, including Lodi. And all of them work together really well to figure things out. When they couldn't have visitors to the tasting rooms, how could they stage outdoor events and learn to do virtual tastings, which opened up a whole new world of introducing people to wine. And all of my friends still complain about how many wine clubs they joined during COVID and are just having to cut back a little bit. But when wine gets a foothold, it helps when the counties and the appellations work together to raise up all the crops that are unique to that area and the chefs that want to be there. And that, to me, it's huge. It provides so many jobs for people in these communities. And we'll probably get into this later, but part of our statewide California Jobs for All is built on 13 regional plans, and 8 of those have agriculture and ag tech as part of it. 5 of those are very focused on agritourism as an economic driver for their region because of what they grow and the wine that's there, as well as other outdoor recreation. So it's a fascinating part of our economy in California.
I would jump right off of that and say that we look at ag tourism, ag education, ag entertainment. It's a way of engaging the general public in a way that I think farming does not. I spoke to a bunch of school kids, middle school kids last week, and I just want to know who I'm speaking with. So I said, how many of you have been to a farm? And there's 230 kids and about 10 hands went up. And how many of you know a farmer? And a few of those hands went down. And when you think about agritourism as a way of introducing the general public, not just to beer, wine, and spirit, or cheese, or milk, or whatever it might be, local ice cream, it's that educational engagement, that ability to engage the general public, that in our 3 states, for sure, we've got large swaths that are agricultural, but most of our people don't live there. Most of our folks are in areas that if they have access to a farm, it may be on a weekend, and it's up to the ag tourism operator to connect the dots. This isn't just an entertainment, an experience, but this is you actually eating, drinking something that came from the land. So we love that. The other thing we love about agritourism, speaking of the economics of it, it allows our smaller parcel farms, and we've got mostly those nowadays. We've managed to preserve a lot, but the remaining ones are very small. And it allows them to level up and bring in revenue that they would not otherwise be able to do by just farming. Creating that product, the value-added product, selling it to the public, it's pretty cool to see that.
I just got to pile on a little bit there.
Yeah, I get to after you.
That's something we all share, and certainly secretaries, that this idea of agritourism. Of course, in New York, we have I Love New York. Everyone has heard that slogan. But I have to say that every time we get with our partners at Empire State Development who do the I Love New York program, every time we invest money there, it comes back tenfold. We invest $60 million, we get billions of dollars back. It's just is rain. And I think understanding that agriculture as economic development is something we all cherish, and we really have to continue to hone in on, because it's true. We all see it. We invest the dollars, bring people out to visit, and it returns us, all our growers, and it returns the state great revenues. So,
looking ahead,
Please,
Karen.
Sorry. No, I just wanted to add on to the ag literacy part of this, because we're so desperate for that, especially in a highly urbanized state like California and Maryland. We have these beautiful pockets of landscape, but we are dominated by our coastal areas, and 40 million consumers live there. Many haven't even been to us. And I remember talking to audiences down in the Santa Maria Valley when they were getting into the wine industry. And I was asked to speak about, what is it that we can do with wine tourism? And I talked about wine has a way of building this bridge of bringing people together in a unique way. And when you put people on a tractor and drive them around the vineyard, they learn so much about agriculture and soil, because wine is about a place and that sense of place and how things grow and photosynthesis. And it's entertaining while you're doing it. And then to have the flavors of it, like, just adds to that dimension. I remember saying, it's easy for me to invite people of influence to a table with good food at a winery. Now, Brussels sprouts not the same. And my good friend Don Talley from Talley Vineyards came up to me afterwards and said, I still have 25 acres of Brussels sprouts in the ground. Be careful what you're saying about Brussels sprouts. It's just one of those factors, but it's an introduction. In this state, few people realize that 60% of our farms are less than 100 acres. And the value added of making wine in the place where the grapes is grown adds to that value. And those small wineries, those small farms, that's what makes up the character and the interest and the vitality of what is happening in our rural communities.
Looking at the intersectionality of your department with your fellow departments in your states, are there any newly applied or pending state agricultural initiatives that will help affect these adult beverage industries that we've mentioned that you're cooperating with in other agencies in your state?
Interesting question. I'll say that there was a bill that was passed 2 years ago which made rye whiskey the state spirit. And I mention that only because there was a lot of support from our Commerce Department, because our Commerce Department looked at what Kentucky has done and Tennessee, et cetera, places where they've branded a particular spirit. And we've got a very long history in spirit making, and specifically whiskey, and specifically rye whiskey. And the tourism that can bring in, the emphasis that it puts on a particular product. And I know that many states and many industries debate, do we have a state grape? Do we have a state this or that? And Maryland has decided not to move forward with limiting itself from a marketing perspective related to wine, and not with spirits either, except we have this history and this heritage with rye whiskey. And so it's been very interesting to see the effect of that. It's really mundane, but one of our largest challenges that we have in Maryland is trying to get these businesses open, because certain state agencies look at a production facility on a farm as a commercial enterprise rather than as an extension of the farm. And we always argue the point that farms have always been commercial, right? No one's ever grown corn for the sake of it. They've grown corn to store corn, to sell corn, to make things out of that corn, to feed animals that are eating that corn, to process the animals, whatever it might be. It's always been a commercial enterprise. So we spend a lot of time on trying to overcome some of the regulations, and we have found under this current administration great support among the other agencies to help us target the rules and regs that probably need to be changed and go after it to help grow the industry, because the rural economy is so critically important to all of our states.
Great answer. I guess I'm still close enough, I think we all are, to the pandemic and the things that the pandemic did to our food system, and how in all our states we had to replumb the food system to get just all egg products where they needed to go. I think in New York we've put together now a strike force, we call it, which is all our agencies that touch our capacity to grow food and deliver food across the state. So a couple of lessons we learned in the pandemic was we better have a food system in our own state that can feed us if we go through something like that. Let's not depend on another part of the world or another region to feed us. And that was mostly with necessities every day, but certainly I would lump in the craft beverage industry or wine. And to that end, when we look at expanding in any part of our food sector here, we bring in DOT, we bring in the environmental team, we bring in our economic development team, we bring in the environmental team, and we look at it together and say, okay, it can't be just one of us that wants to do this. Let's think about this together. What are the needs going to be? And let's head off any problems coming our way. And I think that's been one benefit that I see post-pandemic to the way we think about things. And of course, you can't think about this without recognizing the importance of the restaurant industry, who was shut down and hurt so terribly during the pandemic. They've been our billboards for local food and local craft beverages forever. We really have to credit them with making this a higher level in a consumer's mind, where the food's coming from, where those beverages are coming from, who produced them. I think it's really a silver lining to the pandemic for all of us.
We don't have anything specific in California, and as the wine industry has been struggling because of the imbalance of supply and demand for those entities that have become much more active in the export market, and just looking at what global trends are as well as domestic trends with declining consumption. And so that is working with our friends at the Wine Institute to better understand the deep research they're doing. I don't want to just call it messaging. That to me sounds so simplistic as just a talk thing, but it's really that understanding of how to better connect and engage with consumers in a vastly changing demographic market. I remember when I got into this, we were going through the same kind of bubble of who was drinking wine and who wasn't, and just introducing it as part of a Americana rule, and especially the local food scene. So right now, there's a lot of focus on international and federal issues as far as tariffs and other issues. So I do have to say that, because when we've got almost 5,000 wineries, it's not, I can't speak for just one message of that. But I do think our renewed commitment, this state has not had a statewide economic development plan, and now we have one. It's based on these regional plans, and the investment we're able to make in that through workforce development and grants to help them focus and maintain and strengthen what they're good at. And agriculture is a big part of that, as well as the tourism aspect. When we have something that's been such a great calling card for visitors from the world, I go back to, that's about food and wine and hospitality. And people might not think of us as the hospitality center, but we really pride ourselves on welcoming all people from all walks of life, but not ignoring the tremendous value of our 40 million people that live here that want to just have that weekend getaway. And so I just think all of us working together to really reinforce that nationwide is really important, especially right now where there's a lot of questions about what's going on in America. We just want to be the warm and welcoming place that we know that we are. It starts in our fields and orchards and vineyards.
I think anybody with any understanding of California's position as being the sixth largest economy in the world would understand the context of your role there and how California differs in great respect from its fellow states. You're operating in a very different context, Secretary Ross, to be sure. But one thing all three states have in common is our top-notch agricultural college programs to help its farming community and the world's. What would you three like to share about these relationships that you possess with your educational sector?
I'll say one thing. California wine wouldn't be California wine if it weren't for UC Davis as the land-grant university. It's known around the world. And so I just have to say that. But what's really been the power of having strength there are the partnerships with the Cornell and other universities up and down the Eastern Seaboard, Washington State, Oregon State, and watching the wine industry again come together as growers and vintners to create the Grape Research Alliance. That's focused on the wine, grape, and winery needs of all states, not just one. And I think that's been a huge positive addition for all of us. Holding up research and reminding people that what's going to happen in 20 years won't happen if we aren't making these investments today. We're still living off the investments that came before us. So research is the bedrock of what we do.
That's science.
Absolutely. Karen and I could probably argue for a little while about who's got the best land grant system for ag education in the country.
And those Dutch will come in and scoop us every time, Richard.
Yes, yeah. But the point is that we have the system that has performed so well that I did Farm Bill listening sessions, and I'm sure my colleagues did too, in anticipation of a Farm Bill a couple of years ago, which I'm sure is still in the works. And listen to farmers, talk to people who were on the nutrition title side of the fence, and unquestionably, the first thing I heard from the farm community was research. We were the number one in research in the world for a long time, which is why the United States is able to feed itself today and contribute so much to the world economy. But we're now slipping. We have two regions in the world that are ahead of us, investing more in research than we are. And so I would completely agree that we need to pay attention to the future. We need to look at how good we are and look at the resources that we have within our state. We've got geographies, we've got good land. Some of the best growers in the world are here. And we need to keep up the reputation and the work it takes to keep research alive and in front of growers and in front of the consumers every day. So the relationship we have in New York with Cornell is tremendous. I don't have a day that I don't talk to someone at Cornell about something. And so we're great partners. Things just work better when we work together. And I would say we share with UC Davis, we share with Cornell, we share with Purdue, we get together, we all benefit. That's benefits our agri community in big ways.
If the research was mentioned, I can point to a number of grape varieties in the state that we would not be growing had Dr. Joe Fiola not been working in his research vineyards and showing us the way. Teraldigo, Saperavi, Chenin Blanc, Colombard, whatever it might be, just they wouldn't be on the radar. We'd be sticking with our standard varieties. But there's also hop research, which has gone on where we found a wild hop. And just like with grapes, the hop has to not only grow really well, but it also has to be potentially disease resistant. And it also needs to taste great. And boy, there are a lot of hops that do not taste very good. But we found one and it's glorious. And now we're further down into trials and we've got breweries making beer out of it. And that's very exciting. But it is that relationship. It's integrated pest management. When we've got something, a disease, a bug that we don't know what's going on, we can send it to pathology, we can send it to our entomology folks and get diagnoses back and learn what we can do with IPM and other things to be not only helpful in the vineyard, in the orchard, in the hop yard, but also be sensitive to the environment. That's the other thing that we all have in common is Richard and I are focused on bay restoration. Karen, you've got so much going on when it comes to the environment. We have to be stewards in that respect as well. And the universities, not just ours, College Park, University of Maryland, College Park, great, University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, other land grant, HBCU, fantastic for our students, fantastic for the industry, but we're also leaning on Penn State and Virginia Tech and Cornell and UC Davis because I mentioned Pierce's disease beforehand. Everything we know came from what y'all were doing, and my gosh, how relevant that is. When it comes to spotted lanternfly, that started over here.
I know.
Right? So you can look at University of Maryland and Penn State for the work that they've done on that, and it's that collaboration, collegiality, which matters so much.
If I could add, Kevin, thank you so much for bringing up the environmental work, because as we know, a lot of the first code of sustainable wine growing practices was based on pulling all the best practices out of UC Cooperative Extension and extension around the nation. And that's what made it, I think, so universally embraced by wine grape growers and wineries all across the country, was because it was based on sound science, but had practical application and people could self-assess themselves. So I think it's often overlooked because the wine sector has been in the sustainability certification and practices for so long, we take it for granted. And yet it's still remarkable. From a state that has 400 commodities, there are very few that have done it on a whole sector basis.
So I know that even here in the Hudson Valley, several growers who have lots of heirloom grapes have been approached about making sure that they're getting these kinds of varieties to all the different universities to test for Pierces, et cetera. Are you seeing a shift in possibly what's going to be planted in the next 10 to 20 years because of spotted lanternfly or Pierces?
I have not seen a shift in what's going to be planted at this point. What I have seen, because we've been a part of this, is a redoubling of our investment in integrated pest management. We want to be number one in integrated pest management thinking and research and experimentation. So we've doubled the funding at Cornell to work on this, to know the pest, to actually know your enemy and dive in there and look at how do we control this pest? How do we manage this? Obviously, we're still stepping fast trying to figure out spotted lanternfly and some box tree moth and others that are showing up. And this is another one where we really need to help the grower community who is very anxious to figure this out, how to deal with this using all the methods at our disposal. Integrated pest management for me means common sense. Know your enemy, figure out all the parameters that affect it. It's not just about applying a pesticide, it's using all the tools at your disposal. And I think for us, that means let's invest in those programs, biological methods, rotation methods and cultural things that we can do as well.
If I could add, our Pierce's disease program here in California is a great example of public-private partnerships. The initial funding that came of just a response 25 years ago came from the federal USDA, and growers over the couple of years after that joined with wineries to self-assess themselves. And in fact, this year, the 25th year, we're in the midst of a referendum to see if growers and wineries want to continue that assessment. And it has been focused almost exclusively, those dollars, which is tens of millions of dollars, on research, long-term and short-term. How do we better control it? How do we do it in the most benign way possible? And so the trapping, the survey work, that grower cooperation, and cooperation with our citrus growers, because they can be a host, as well as nursery inspections. But more importantly, they've funded over 300 projects on research, and some of the findings of that as a long-term strategy, while the state does its business of keeping the pest out of the state, has been a new Pierce's disease resistant varietal. Now, that is just a very complicated journey, because getting it that could work, flavor, taste, profile, and then consumer acceptance of the technology, which is plant breeding, but having that accepted, this is the beginning of the longer term solution of actually getting trials in the ground. Some of the first ones happened in Texas, and now there's some here in California. But this is a long process. I will say what's probably changing plantings for us as much as anything is the extreme weather events and changing climates. So looking for more varietals that are resistant to whatever, including drought tolerance and everything that goes with what we're facing going forward, not just always what we've faced in the past.
I think this next question then dovetails perfectly into what you were talking about earlier, all three of you, which was in 2012, all three of your states passed a Farm Brewery Act. And I know that several of your agricultural programs faced some of the same challenges, like hops and growing barley, in a period where that really wasn't something that was happening at the moment, but lawmakers were excited to try to get on board with because the Farm Winery Act had been so popular. Can you speak to the growth of your beer industry and some of the challenges that you encountered on that way?
I can just say quickly on the growth of our beer industry, and we were not the first to come up with the Farm Brewery Act. We looked to places like New York. And Richard, I'll love to hear your perspective on the strictness of yours. We went the other way and made ours less stringent in terms of the requirement for local ingredients, precisely because of the reason that Carlo mentioned, which was there wasn't a whole lot of barley grown in the state. Historically, yes, we knew how to do it. At least the farmers' parents knew how to do it. And so it was trying to bring that knowledge back. But same thing about hops and other things. Our challenge was going back to the planning and zoning and permitting and all of those things. The state and the counties had gotten used to permitting wineries because we'd been doing it for 30 years. Enter brewery, and of course, naively, I think, same, liquid, growing on the farm, not a problem. Oh no. The state looked at brewing as very differently, and then did and has gone back to look at our requirements. So I know there continue to be discussions about making our farm brewery law potentially more strict in terms of the use of local ingredients, much like New York and some other states.
Sure, I guess that's my cue, huh?
Back to you, Rich.
Yeah, thank you. We saw tremendous growth in the brewery industry. I think what really jumped out at us was that the relationship between people that wanted to brew beer, maltsters, and growers was, they didn't know each other, had no idea where each other was. And I remember whether it was a governor or a brewer or anybody calling me all the time saying, we can't find any barley, we can't find any hops, we can't comply with this law. And I had growers calling me at the same time saying, I got 2 bins full of barley here, what am I supposed to do with this? And the disconnect, because we didn't have a relationship. And real fast, we got Cornell doing research on barley varieties, on hop varieties. And I'm happy to tell you, we have plenty of barley, plenty of hops in New York State grown to satisfy all the requirements that we need. But there are so many nuances to actually brewing, to actually making malt, and to actually growing the crop that it was quite an adjustment for a few years, I have to confess. But I think we fine-tuned it a lot. We had a lot of, I was talking earlier with a friend of mine this morning, a good friend who was in the brewing business very successfully. He came to me and said, hey, I just rented a bunch of land and I planted 100 acres of barley, so I'm going to be all set. And I was like, oh no, this is not going to end well, because it's not just an art, it's a science to grow these crops and grow them well. But I think we've really come a long way in New York State. And now we have a much more mature relationship with what we need, the varieties that we need. And Cornell's been so helpful in coming up with named varieties that work well in New York State, not just in the state of Washington, but actually can satisfy what our maltsters and our brewers need. So it's exciting to see that growth and the fine-tuning that's gone along with it.
And perhaps California's law is slightly different because it wasn't as much about the ingredients. The real foundation of this was that to allow a farm to have a brewery, but that 70% of the land had to be agricultural. That's what connects it back to the land. The vast majority of our breweries do happen to be in more urban areas in proximity to perhaps wine country as one example, but the growth has really been in urban areas. And I have had friends who have worked really hard because they're in an urban area, try to lease some land to grow hops, which is a significant investment and hasn't always been very successful. I have to say, I hate it every time I drive into San Francisco and go by the field that used to be a hops field. And it's ironic because Sacramento used to be a major hops producer in our region, and now there's de minimis acreage of that.
So given that there's been some recent seemingly reliable data pointing to a decline in adult beverage consumption overall, how do you think that your state's wine, beer, cider, spirits sectors are responding? Have you reached a saturation level, or is there still room for more growth? And if you think there is more room for growth, please give some pointers as to how this can be achieved.
I'm looking for the wisdom from my colleagues here.
Look, I think that whenever the market tightens, and we are most definitely in a spot where the consumption market has tightened, and some of that is just the evolution of consumption preferences, personal preferences, but some of that is that we had this boom over the last decade, and we have more businesses of each of these types than we've seen before. I have always gone back to three things. The proprietor in whatever sector this is has to have a really solid product, has to have a really solid brand, and then needs to be able to provide that story and provide that experience. I think we've moved from, certainly with beer, that it's on the shelf type of product, and certainly with local wine. I remember when we used to really be pushing wholesale and you got to be in wholesale. Now it's about, you got to have an experience. You got to be a place that people want to come to. It's Richard talking about Long Island, and Karen with all of your capitals of wine and countries of wine that you have. It's, if you have those three things, you're going to be fine. There's going to be a market for you. But if any one of those is shaky, the brand, the product, the experience, it's a competitive market. There's someone else that can do it better.
Well said, Kevin.
That's a great answer, and it's totally accurate. I'm still bullish. I'm still excited about the potential, because Kevin and I do share the largest marketplace, most diverse marketplace anywhere in the world. And Karen, you do too, to a very great degree. I always tell growers, it doesn't start with what you like to grow. It doesn't start with what you're good at. It starts with who your customer is. And customer changes. The customer gets older. The customer gets younger. We're seeing another generation here that has demonstrated post-pandemic some different appetites and some different interest in terms of their adult beverages. And I think that's exciting. That offers us an opportunity. But as Kevin mentioned, we have to have good quality. We have to be there. We have to provide that environment that they're going to be interested in. What else do they want? It's really about putting the grower and the producer in touch with the consumer. I think and with that said, we still don't own the marketplace. We still have so much upside. It's just exciting for me, but we have to be willing to change. We have to be willing to adapt and think about what their needs are, what their wants are, what they're looking for.
Richard, when you look at what we could do across just this country, just thinking domestic markets, and part of that is that backyard, like it's in my backyard, let's like enjoy that experience. And so many wineries now provide a whole family experience. And I think we have to be mindful of, it is an alcoholic adult beverage. And part of what the pushback is right now is going back to the health messaging that we thought we wouldn't be in all over again. And that for me is why it's so important. We see it every day, stories about how disconnected this younger generation is. They grew up and came into COVID. Their first working experiences or college was COVID. And that desire and the importance of social interaction. And for me, this is a part of the experience, whether it's in a restaurant or an urban brewery that has great outdoor expenses, opportunities with horseshoes or whatever it might be. Not hatchets, please. I just can't see that. The hatchet thing, the axe throwing, and adult beverages. I think this is a very important part of us engaging about a social experience, sharing, having great conversation, and that an adult beverage can be a part of that with a good food and wine. It's not about binge drinking. This is not what we're in the business of doing. We're about showcasing agricultural products that come from your own local community and making that a pleasurable experience that you want to have with friends and family. And I think that's something that we can still do so much more work in.
Using that as a jumping off point, Karen, in a world that's given to globalization and diversification, by which means does your office's affect its branding and marketing so as to attain recognition for the value, quality, and distinctiveness of its produce, especially in light of its adult beverages?
The commodity market's never been the best value for farmers. It's an important part of the global market and making sure that we have supply for a large numbers of people. But where the real value is coming back is where we can add value on the farm with great quality and really differentiate ourselves. And we're lucky in California to have such a big, diverse state with so many appellations and different kinds of wines and place-based experiences that becomes even more important, whether it's avocados from California or peaches from the Central Valley. Sorry to my friends in Georgia, we grow a lot of peaches here. They're the great wines throughout California. And so I think given what we're facing right now, there'll always be a commodity market out there, but the real value for local communities driving the economic development. Also, it's not one or the other. We can do both. And we really have a chance to showcase quality from the place where these were grown and really continue to enhance that.
Kevin, I'm curious, given your position as being part of the DC metro area, you got some international impact there for a relatively small state. How does this intersect with what Maryland's doing?
I think, a lot of what Karen was talking about is applicable everywhere. The upside is we've got this international market right behind us. Every farmer in Maryland, whether it's far western Maryland or Eastern Shore, has access to 2 or 3 major metropolitan areas within a 2-hour drive. And that's easy to get to from a tourism standpoint, from putting a product on a truck to get it somewhere. The challenge, though, is that when you're in an international market, you are competing against everyone. I remember when I was very involved in Wine America, and we had a regional meeting, annual meeting in Idaho, and hearing their stats in Idaho, sales of Idaho wine made up some ungodly number, like 40% of all wine sold in Idaho was Idaho wine. And I'm thinking, like, we might be at 3%, and that is a hard-fought 3%, because when you're in DC, people want whatever they're used to, and they're used to having a flight of wine from the Rhone or the Rhine or the Stellenbosch or whatever it might be. And so And that goes back to, we really have to have our message. We really have to have our brand be really tight. And I say that the we as every producer, but then as a state as well, because it's not Maryland trying to get its product out there. It's Maryland trying to get its product out there, and Virginia trying to get its product out there, and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York, et cetera. And we're all in this same market. And the blueberries are coming from New Jersey, and the apples are coming from all over the place. But New York has a huge industry. And when it comes to grapes, they're the behemoth in the region. So it's figuring out, just like back to the universities, it's figuring out where we can excel and try not to do everything, because you can't do everything well. Where can we focus? But where can we find some kind of a broad message that begins to resonate with an ever-changing market?
Yeah, great wisdom there. I think that for those of us broadly in agriculture, and certainly craft beverages, wine producers, no exception here, that we've learned the traditional thinking was, how do we outproduce? How do we get more tons to the acre? How do we get more bushels to the acre? And we've, as farmers, I'm guilty, got into this mentality around production. And I think we need to be on that, because there's always someone somewhere in the world, somewhere in this country, who has a lower cost of production than we do. And so I think we need to stay closer to the market, think about the consumer. And for us in New York, we have oriented our marketing programs around Taste New York, which is an opportunity for travelers who come to New York to experience over 1,200 different producers' value-added products when they're traveling across our state at a thruway stop or at an airport or on a boat. So that's been a way to push New York, push local, push that better flavor kind of thing. And then we've added a branding program for our agricultural products called New York Grown Certified, where we talk about the fact that it's local, and everybody assumes local is going to be fresher and taste better, which is probably accurate. But they want to know about food safety. They also want to know about environmental stewardship. And so we put those three legs together under that stool we call Grown and Certified, to say, this is local, you can feel good about that. It's also got coming from a farm that has environmental stewardship baked into their way of doing business, and it has food safety baked into their GAP certified. They can be any market anywhere because of that. And so I think it's a combination of those things that provide us great opportunities going forward.
We're about to wrap this up. I can't thank all of you enough. As we are getting ready to sign off, what's on the horizon for your state's agricultural sector in support of its homegrown adult beverage industry overall? And are there any new initiatives that you might want to mention as we leave?
I'll end at least our segment in Maryland with, we're hopeful. We look at the resiliency of farmers, and these craft beverages are extensions of farmers, whether they're producing in warehouses or producing on the farm. These are folks that are using agricultural ingredients. And with everything that's going on in the broader world, most of which we have no control over whatsoever, we will always have neighbors, we will always have potential customers. And I am hopeful that through education, through engagement, through our programs, but we're just a piece of this broader ecosystem. It's the industry, trade associations, it's, as I mentioned, the university. It's all working together to make sure that we're developing products that at the end of the day are educating folks about agriculture and preserving land. And that will be the win for us, is if in 20 years, Maryland is as green as it was before, more people are choosing local products. And I have a lot of excitement for the future.
And I'm optimistic as well. Our Visit California, which is our tourism, it's a commission that the sector that's all about tourism helps fund on an annual basis. But as a result of the COVID and the IRA dollars, they received a big grant to update their strategic plan for tourism, just knowing all the changes that had happened and what we had learned and are trying to respond to as a result of COVID. And so they released their draft plan in March of 2025, which includes a really strong plank. They've always had a strong pillar around food and wine tourism. and has a more emphasis on agritourism as part of overall Visit California. Visit California has a strong partnership with California Grown, which is our branding for agricultural foods that are grown here in the state. And so we're excited about some of the new opportunities to actually expand with intentionality agritourism. It's always just happened. We had one cooperative extension person at UC, Ag and Natural Resources, that tried to help people with zoning and permits. And we're holding a summit in May, actually, all around agritourism down in San Diego, which is a county that has more small farms than any other county in California, over 5,000 very small farms. And so I'm excited about having some intentionality about growing agritourism as part of overall Visit California and Taste the Food and Wines of California, and other adult beverages, of course.
Wow, that's two great summations. I mean, if you look around today where we are, there's plenty of things to worry about. And the amount of uncertainty in our agricultural community, our wine producers and beer brewers, everything, there's plenty to worry about when you turn on the news. But I think we can't control all the things that are coming at us right now, but in each one of our regions, each one of our states, we have decades of good programming, good traditions. We need to double down on the things that we can put our arms around. We all share good land. We all share good growers. We've got some of the best growers in the world in our states. And we still don't own our marketplaces. We still have room in our marketplace. There's still upside in that marketplace to connect the dots in a better way. The number of people who don't know farmers, don't know what farmers do today, in spite of the fact that we're doing a better job today than we've ever done in the history of mankind, is an enormous opportunity. So I don't think I still worry every day with what I see in the news, but I got to tell you that if I was the next generation on my farm and I have them there, I'm more excited about the opportunities in front of them than when I started farming. I like where we are.
Thank you, Karen Ross, Richard Ball, and Kevin Addix for drinking on the edge with Carlo DeVito and I. Thank you again.
Cheers.